The blizzard struck without warning that November afternoon in 1884, turning the New Mexico landscape into a white hell that swallowed everything in its path. And Samuel Tucker knew if he did not find shelter soon, he would freeze to death before sunset. He had been riding fence lines on the eastern edge of his ranch when the temperature plummeted, and the sky opened up with a fury he had rarely witnessed. His horse, a sturdy buckskin mare named Copper, struggled through the deepening drifts as Samuel pulled his coat tighter and squinted against the stinging snow. The wind howled like a wounded animal, and visibility dropped to mere feet ahead. He had been a cowboy all his 26 years, born and raised on this unforgiving land. But nature had a way of humbling even the most experienced rancher. Through the white curtain ahead, Samuel spotted something dark against the snow. At first he thought it might be a boulder or a fallen tree, but as Copper pushed forward, he realized it was a person. A woman, collapsed in the snow, her dark cloak barely visible beneath the accumulating powder. His heart lurched as he dismounted quickly, his boots sinking deep into the drift. "Madam!" he shouted over the wind, dropping to his knees beside her. "Madam, can you hear me?" She was conscious, but barely. Her lips blue with cold, her whole body shaking violently. Her eyes fluttered open, revealing the darkest brown irises he had ever seen, filled with fear and confusion. She tried to speak, but her teeth chattered too hard to form words. "I have got you," Samuel said, making his decision in an instant. "Can you stand?" She nodded weakly and with his help managed to get to her feet. She was small and slight, maybe 22 or 23 years old, and clearly not dressed for this kind of weather. Her cloak was thin, more suited for autumn rain than a blizzard, and she wore ordinary shoes rather than proper boots. Samuel pulled off his heavy coat and wrapped it around her shoulders over her own inadequate covering. "My cabin is about a mile north," he said directly into her ear so she could hear him over the wind. "Can you ride?" Again, she nodded, though her whole body trembled so hard he worried she might not be able to hold on. He lifted her onto Copper's saddle, then mounted behind her, pulling her back against his chest to share what warmth he had left. She was ice cold, and he could feel her violent shivers even through their layers of clothing. The ride to his cabin felt like an eternity. Samuel had built the small structure 3 years ago as a line shack, a place to stay when working the far reaches of his property. It was rough but sturdy, with a good fireplace and enough supplies to wait out a storm. He just prayed they could make it before the woman in his arms succumbed to the cold. Copper knew the way even when Samuel could barely see, and finally, the dark outline of the cabin emerged from the white chaos. He guided the mare to the small lean-to stable attached to the side, grateful for the shelter it would provide the horse. Dismounting carefully, he lifted the woman down, noticing how light she was, how limp she had become. "Stay with me," he urged, half carrying her to the cabin door. "We are almost there. You are going to be fine." Inside, the cabin was cold but at least protected from the wind. Samuel laid the woman on the single cot in the corner, then immediately set to work building a fire in the stone fireplace. His fingers fumbled with the matches, numb from the cold, but finally, the kindling caught and flames began to lick at the larger logs he had stacked. Only when the fire was burning steadily did he turn his full attention to his unexpected guest. In the growing firelight, he could see her more clearly. She had delicate features and long dark hair that had come loose from its pins, spreading across the thin pillow like spilled ink. Her clothes were those of a lady, well-made but impractical and completely soaked through. "Madam, I need to get you out of these wet clothes," Samuel said, keeping his voice respectful but urgent. "You will not warm up unless we do. I promise I will be a gentleman about it." Her eyes opened slightly, and she managed a small nod. Samuel found his spare clothes in a trunk at the foot of the bed, pulling out a flannel shirt and wool pants that would be far too large for her, but would be dry and warm. He turned his back to give her privacy, then realized she was shaking too hard to undress herself. "I am going to help you," he said, still keeping his back turned. "Just with the buttons and such. You can do the rest." Moving with careful respect, Samuel helped her sit up and worked the buttons of her soaked dress with stiff fingers. She tried to help but could barely control her movements. He kept his eyes averted as much as possible, focusing on the task at hand rather than the fact that he was undressing a complete stranger. When the worst of the wet clothes were off, he handed her the dry shirt and turned completely away while she struggled into it. "The pants too," he said to the wall. "I know it is not proper, but proper will not keep you alive." He heard rustling behind him, small gasps of effort, and finally, a weak voice said, "Done." Samuel turned to find her sitting on the cot, swimming in his clothes, looking like a child playing dress-up. But her shivering had not diminished, and her lips were still far too blue. He had seen men with frostbite before, had seen what severe cold could do to a person, and he knew she was not out of danger yet. "I am going to tend to the horse, then make us something warm to drink," he said. "There are blankets in that trunk. Get under them, all of them." Outside in the lean-to, Samuel worked quickly to unsaddle Copper and rub her down. The mare had saved both their lives today, and he made sure she had feed and water before heading back inside. The temperature was still dropping, and the wind had picked up even more. They were in for a bad one. Back in the cabin, he found the woman had managed to cocoon herself in the blankets, only her pale face visible. The fire was burning well now, pushing back the cold, and Samuel hung their wet clothes near it to dry. He put a pot of water on the iron hook over the flames, adding coffee grounds and waiting for it to boil. "What is your name?" he asked, settling into the wooden chair near the fire. Margaret," she managed through chattering teeth. "Margaret Harris. I am Samuel Tucker. This is my line shack on the eastern edge of my ranch. What were you doing out there in this storm, Miss Harris?" She closed her eyes, tears leaking from the corners. "I was traveling to Santa Fe. The stage coach broke a wheel and the driver said we would have to wait for help. But then the storm came so suddenly. Everyone scattered. I tried to follow the others, but I got turned around. I could not see anything." Samuel's jaw tightened. The driver should have kept everyone together. That was foolish. "Is anyone else going to find shelter?" Margaret asked, genuine concern in her voice despite her own precarious situation. "The main road is only about 2 miles west of here. If the others stayed with the coach, they will be all right. Most stage coach drivers carry supplies for emergencies. It is you who wandered off that I am worried about." He poured the hot coffee into a tin cup and brought it to her. "Drink this slowly. It will help warm you from the inside." Margaret struggled to sit up enough to drink, her hands shaking so badly that Samuel had to help her hold the cup. The hot liquid seemed to help, bringing a bit of color back to her cheeks. She managed about half the cup before exhaustion claimed her, and her eyes began to drift closed. "Sleep," Samuel said gently. "You are safe now." He took the cup from her hands and watched as she sank deeper into the blankets, her breathing evening out. Only then did he allow himself to truly assess their situation. The storm showed no signs of letting up. In fact, from the sound of the wind, it was only getting worse. They had enough food for several days, plenty of firewood and water from the snow if needed. They could survive until the storm passed. What worried him was the woman herself, Margaret Harris. She was clearly a lady, educated and refined if her speech was any indication. What was she doing traveling alone to Santa Fe in November? It was an unusual time for travel, especially for a woman by herself. Not that it was any of his business, Samuel reminded himself. His job was simply to keep her alive until the storm passed, and then help her get to wherever she was going. Nothing more. But as he sat in the firelight, listening to her quiet breathing and the howl of the wind outside, Samuel could not help but notice how beautiful she was, even pale and exhausted. There was something about her that pulled at him, made him want to know her story, to understand what had brought her to that moment of collapse in the snow. He shook his head at his own thoughts. This was not the time for such considerations. He added another log to the fire, checked that the door was secure against the wind, and settled into his chair to keep watch through the night. Morning came gray and cold, the storm still raging outside. Samuel had dozed in the chair, waking every hour or so to tend the fire. Margaret had slept through the night, which he took as a good sign. Her body needed rest to recover from the ordeal. As dawn light filtered weakly through the single window, Margaret stirred. Her eyes opened, clearer now than they had been the night before, and she looked around the cabin with confusion before her gaze settled on Samuel. "You saved my life," she said, her voice stronger. "I found you," Samuel corrected. "This cabin and that fireplace saved your life." Margaret pushed herself up to sitting, keeping the blankets wrapped around her shoulders. "Nevertheless, I owe you a debt I can never repay if you had not come along when you did." "But I did," Samuel said firmly. "No point dwelling on what might have been. How do you feel this morning?" "Warm," she said with a small smile, "which is a considerable improvement over yesterday." Her smile faded as she looked toward the window. "The storm has not stopped." "No, and from the looks of it, it will not for a while yet. We have got enough supplies to last us, though." "You do not need to worry." Margaret pulled the blankets tighter around herself, and Samuel noticed a flicker of something in her eyes. Worry, fear. "How long do you think we will be stuck here?" Samuel stood and moved to the window, looking out at the white wall of snow. "Hard to say with certainty. Could be a day, could be 3. These early season storms are unpredictable. They blow in fast and hard, but usually blow themselves out fairly quick." "Why, are people expecting you in Santa Fe?" A pause then. "No, not specifically. I was hoping to find work there." "What kind of work?" Another pause, longer this time. Margaret seemed to be weighing how much to tell him. Finally, she said, "I was a teacher back in Boston. I am hoping to find a position at a school in Santa Fe, Boston." That explained the refined accent, the quality of her clothes. "That is a long way to come for a teaching position." "I needed a fresh start," Margaret said, and something in her tone made it clear the subject was closed. Samuel did not push. Everyone had a right to their secrets, especially out here where many came to escape their pasts. "Well, you will get to Santa Fe eventually, just not today." He busied himself making breakfast, such as it was. Hardtack, some beans he had stored in a jar, and more coffee. Not fancy, but it was food. Margaret accepted the plate gratefully, eating with the careful manners of someone raised with proper etiquette. As they ate, Samuel found himself studying her in the daylight. She was lovely. There was no denying it, with her dark eyes and hair, her delicate features. But there was also a sadness about her, a weight she carried that went beyond simple travel weariness. He wondered what had driven her to leave Boston, to travel alone across the country to a territory that was still rough and barely tamed. "You live out here alone?" Margaret asked, breaking the comfortable silence. "Not usually. My main house is about 5 miles west. I run cattle, and this cabin is for when I am working this section of my land. I was checking fence lines when the storm hit." "You have a ranch of your own?" "That must be quite an accomplishment for someone so young." Samuel shrugged. "I am 26. Been working this land since I was a boy. My father built the ranch from nothing, and when he passed 3 years ago, it came to me. It is not the biggest spread in New Mexico, but it is mine. I am sorry about your father. Thank you. He was a good man, taught me everything I know about ranching and about being a decent human being. Samuel stood and collected their empty plates. What about your family? They must be worried about you traveling so far alone. Margaret's expression shuddered. I have no family, not anymore. The pain in those few words was palpable, and Samuel wished he had not asked. I am sorry. It is all right, you could not have known. She stood, the blankets falling away to reveal his oversized clothes on her small frame. Is there anything I can do to help? I feel useless just sitting here. Samuel could not help but smile at the sight of her in his clothes, at the determined set of her jaw despite everything she had been through. You nearly froze to death yesterday. I think you are entitled to be useless for a day or two. But Margaret shook her head. Idleness will only make me dwell on things better left alone. Please, there must be something I can do. Her insistence was genuine, and Samuel found himself admiring her spirit. All right, can you mend? I have got a couple shirts that could use some attention, and there is a sewing kit in that trunk. Relief crossed her face at having a task. I can mend. My stitches are quite neat, if I do say so myself. As the day wore on, they settled into an easy routine. Samuel maintained the fire, checked on copper in the lean-to, and did small repairs around the cabin. Margaret worked on his shirts, her fingers moving with practiced skill. They talked occasionally, sharing small stories about their lives, though both seemed to avoid anything too personal. Samuel learned that Margaret loved to read, that she had a passion for teaching that went beyond simple employment. She spoke of her students back in Boston with real affection, describing how rewarding it was to see a child's face light up when they finally understood a difficult concept. Margaret learned that Samuel loved his ranch with a quiet intensity, that he found peace in the hard work and solitude of cowboy life. He spoke of the satisfaction of helping a calf into the world, of the beauty of watching the sun rise over his land, of the simple pleasure of a good horse and an honest day's work. As evening approached and Samuel lit the oil lamp against the gathering darkness, the storm still showed no signs of abating. If anything, the wind had picked up even more, whistling through the gaps in the walls and making the cabin creak. It sounds like the world is ending out there, Margaret said, looking toward the window where snow pressed against the glass. Just nature reminding us who is really in charge, Samuel replied. He had made more beans for dinner, this time with a bit of salt pork he had found in his supplies. Tomorrow it might be clear as a bell, that is how it goes out here. But when tomorrow came, the storm raged on, and the day after that. Samuel began to worry about his supplies. He had not stocked the line shack for an extended stay, certainly not for 2 people. They would not starve, but rations would need to be tight if the storm continued much longer. Margaret seemed to sense his concern. We will be all right, she said that third morning, as if she were the one reassuring him. The storm cannot last forever. You are right about that, Samuel agreed, but he could not shake the worry. What if the storm did not break? What if they were trapped here for a week? 2 weeks? That afternoon, as they sat by the fire, Margaret suddenly said, "One more night." Samuel looked up from the piece of leather he was working. What? That is what I keep telling myself. Just one more night, and then surely the storm will pass. One more night of being stuck here, of wearing your clothes and eating your food and imposing on your hospitality. She smiled, but there was a tightness around her eyes. Just one more night. You are not imposing, Samuel said firmly. I am glad I found you, glad I could help. You can stay as many nights as needed. You are very kind, kinder than you probably should be to a stranger. Out here we take care of each other. It is the only way to survive. Margaret was quiet for a moment then. Can I ask you something? Of course. You ever feel lonely out here? Just you and your ranch and all this empty land? Samuel considered the question. Sometimes, he admitted. But it is a different kind of loneliness than being surrounded by people and still feeling alone. Out here, the loneliness is honest, pure. There is no pretense to it. I understand that, Margaret said softly. Sometimes I felt more alone in Boston, surrounded by thousands of people, than I have felt in all my time traveling. Is that why you left? She met his eyes, and in the firelight he saw a depth of pain that made his chest ache. Partly. I left because I had to. Because staying would have destroyed me. Samuel wanted to ask more, wanted to understand what had hurt her so badly, but he held back. Well, I am glad you came west, despite the circumstances of how we met. Margaret smiled, a genuine smile that transformed her face. I am glad too. Even stuck in a blizzard, I feel more myself than I have in a long time. The fourth day dawned with a change in the air. The wind had died down considerably, and though snow still fell, it was lighter, gentler. Samuel stood at the window, watching the gray sky, and felt hope stir in his chest. I think it is almost over, he announced. Margaret came to stand beside him, close enough that he could smell the faint lavender scent that clung to her hair despite everything. Really? See how the wind has calmed, and the snow is falling straight down instead of sideways. The worst has passed. By tomorrow morning I would bet we will see sun. Relief flooded Margaret's face, but Samuel was surprised to see something else there too, something that looked almost like disappointment, but before he could analyze it, she turned away. That is wonderful news. You must be eager to get back to your ranch to check on your livestock. I am, Samuel admitted. Though I confess, the company has made this enforced stay much more pleasant than it might have been. Margaret glanced at him, a slight blush coloring her cheeks. You have been a perfect gentleman through all of this. Your mother raised you well. My mother died when I was young, but my father made sure I understood how to treat a lady with respect. Samuel moved away from the window, suddenly restless. Margaret, can I ask you something now? Of course. What will you do when we get you to Santa Fe? Do you have a place to stay? Money to support yourself while you look for a teaching position? Margaret's blush deepened, but this time with what looked like embarrassment. I have enough money for a few weeks at a boarding house. As for a teaching position, I have letters of recommendation from my previous school. I am hopeful that will be enough. And if it is not, she lifted her chin, that determined expression he was coming to know well, then I will find something else. I am not afraid of hard work, Samuel. I will do what I must. He believed her. In the 4 days they had been trapped together, he had seen her strength, her resilience, her refusal to be defeated by circumstances. But he also saw her vulnerability, the fear she tried to hide beneath her brave words. I have a proposition for you, Samuel said before he could talk himself out of it. Come stay at my ranch until spring. Margaret stared at him. What? You need a place to stay, and I could use help around the house. It is no secret that cowboys are not the best housekeepers, and I have been living like a bachelor for 3 years now. You could help with cooking, mending, the general running of a household. In exchange, you would have a room, meals, and a small salary. When spring comes and travel is easier, I will take you to Santa Fe myself. By then you will have saved more money and will be in a better position to establish yourself. Samuel, I could not possibly. Why not? It is a practical arrangement. I need help. You need a place to stay. Nothing improper about it. I have ranch hands who live in the bunkhouse, so there will be others around. Your reputation would not suffer. Margaret bit her lip, clearly torn. It is incredibly generous, but people will talk. Let them. Out here, people understand that survival sometimes requires unconventional arrangements. Please, Margaret, at least consider it." She was quiet for a long moment, and Samuel could almost see the thoughts racing through her mind. Finally, she said, "Can I give you an answer when we reach your ranch?" "I would like to see it first, meet these ranch hands you speak of, before I commit to anything." "That is fair," Samuel agreed, even as disappointment flickered through him. He had hoped she would say yes immediately, which told him his feelings about this woman had developed beyond simple concern for her welfare. That night, the snow stopped completely. Samuel lay in the bedroll he had made for himself on the floor, listening to Margaret's soft breathing from the cot, and wondered what he was doing. He had known this woman for only 4 days, 4 days trapped in a cabin during a blizzard. That was no foundation for anything, certainly not for the confusing tangle of feelings he found growing in his chest. She was beautiful, yes, but it was more than that. It was her strength, her intelligence, her kindness despite her own pain. It was the way she smiled when she thought he was not looking, the way she hummed softly while she mended his shirts, the way she made this rough cabin feel like a home simply by being in it. Samuel had been alone for a long time. He had told himself he preferred it that way, that he did not need anyone else. But Margaret's presence had awakened something in him, a longing he had not even known existed. The thought of her leaving, of never seeing her again after they reached Santa Fe, left a hollow ache in his chest. But he could not tell her that, could not burden her with his feelings when she was vulnerable and dependent on him for safety. The only honorable thing to do was offer her practical help, a way to get back on her feet, and then let her make her own choices about her future. Even if those choices did not include him. Morning broke clear and cold, the sky a brilliant blue that hurt to look at. The world was transformed, buried under several feet of snow that sparkled like diamonds in the sunlight. Samuel stood in the doorway, breathing in the clean air, and felt the tension of the last 4 days ease from his shoulders. "It is beautiful," Margaret said, coming to stand beside him. She had changed back into her own clothes, now dry, though she still wore his coat over her thin cloak. "I have never seen anything quite like it. Winter can be harsh out here, but it can be beautiful too," Samuel agreed. He turned to her. "We should leave as soon as possible. The temperature will drop again once the sun goes down, and I want to make it back to my ranch before then." Margaret nodded, and within the hour they were ready. Samuel had saddled Copper and packed what few supplies they needed. The ride would be slow going through the deep snow, but the mare was strong and sure-footed. He lifted Margaret onto the saddle, then mounted behind her as he had that first day. But this time, she was not a frozen stranger. This time she leaned back against him with trust, and he wrapped one arm around her waist to hold her steady, trying to ignore how right it felt to have her there. The journey took most of the day. The snow was deeper than Samuel had anticipated, and several times they had to backtrack to find a passable route. But Copper pushed through steadily, and finally, in the late afternoon, they crested a rise and Samuel's ranch came into view. It was not much to look at, especially buried in snow. A 2-story house built of timber and stone, weathered by wind and sun. A large barn, a bunkhouse, several corrals. But to Samuel it was everything, his life's work and his father's legacy, and he felt a surge of pride as they approached. 2 men emerged from the barn at the sound of Copper's hooves. Both were bundled against the cold, and their faces lit up with relief when they saw Samuel. "Boss, we were about to organize a search party." The speaker was Jack Reynolds, Samuel's foreman and closest friend. He was a few years older than Samuel, with a weathered face and kind eyes. "When the storm hit and you did not come back, we figured you either made it to the line shack, or we would be digging your frozen corpse out of a snowdrift come spring." "Nice to see you too, Jack," Samuel said dryly. He dismounted, then helped Margaret down. "I made it to the cabin. Found Miss Harris here on the way. She was stranded when her stagecoach broke down." Jack's eyes widened as he took in Margaret, and he quickly pulled off his hat. "Madam, Jack Reynolds, foreman of this outfit. This here is Pete Carson, one of our hands." Pete, a young man barely 20, also removed his hat and nodded respectfully. "Madam, Margaret Harris," she said with a slight curtsy that seemed automatic. "I am very pleased to meet you both. Your employer saved my life." "That sounds like something he would do," Jack said with a grin. "Boss has a habit of collecting strays. We got 3 dogs, 2 cats, and a one-eyed mule to prove it." Samuel felt his face heat. "I do not collect strays. If you say so, boss." Jack's grin widened, but his eyes were shrewd as they moved between Samuel and Margaret. "How long were you two stuck in that cabin?" "4 days," Samuel said. "The storm just cleared this morning. Jack, could you take care of Copper? I need to get Miss Harris inside where it is warm." "Sure thing." Jack took Copper's reins, but not before shooting Samuel a look that clearly said they would be talking later. Samuel led Margaret to the house, suddenly nervous about what she would think of it. He was no homemaker. The place was clean enough, but bare and utilitarian, lacking any of the touches that made a house a home. Inside, it was cold but not frigid. The fire had gone out days ago, but the thick walls had held some heat. Samuel immediately set to work building a new fire in the large stone fireplace that dominated the main room. Margaret stood in the center of the room, looking around. The main floor was open, with a sitting area near the fireplace, a kitchen along one wall, and a dining table between. A staircase led to the second floor where the bedrooms were. "It is not fancy," Samuel said, feeling the need to apologize, "but it is sturdy and warm once the fire gets going." "It is wonderful," Margaret said, and she sounded like she meant it. "Much bigger than I expected." "You must rattle around in here all alone." "Sometimes," Samuel admitted. "My father built it hoping for a large family, but my mother only managed 1 child before she died. He never remarried." He stood as the fire caught and began to spread. "Let me show you the rest." He led her upstairs where there were 4 bedrooms. His own room, his father's old room which he had not touched since the man's death, and 2 smaller rooms that had been intended for children who never came. "This one has the best light," Samuel said, opening the door to one of the smaller rooms. It faced east and had a large window that would catch the morning sun. "It is yours if you want it, if you decide to stay, I mean." Margaret stepped into the room, moving to the window to look out at the snow-covered land. "You really mean it, do not you? The offer to stay until spring?" "I do." Samuel stayed in the doorway, giving her space. "I know it is unusual, but I meant what I said. You need a place to stay, and I could genuinely use the help. There is no obligation, though. If you would rather I take you to Santa Fe, I will do that. Whatever you want." She turned to face him, and in the fading afternoon light her expression was unreadable. "Can I really give you my answer tomorrow? I would like to sleep on it one more night." "One more night," Samuel echoed, remembering how she had used that phrase in the cabin. "Of course. Take all the time you need." That evening, Samuel cooked dinner, a skill he had developed through necessity rather than talent. Margaret insisted on helping despite his protests, and together they managed a decent meal of steak, potatoes, and the last of the fresh bread Jack had baked before the storm. They ate at the dining table, a strange kind of formality after the intimacy of the cabin. Samuel found himself missing the closeness, the easy conversation, the feeling that it was just the 2 of them against the storm. "Your foreman seems like a good man," Margaret said, breaking the silence. "Jack is the best. Been with me since my father hired him 5 years ago. I could not run this place without him. And Pete, Good kid. Eager to learn. He came from back east originally, wanted to be a cowboy. He is learning quick that it is not as romantic as the dime novels make it out to be. Margaret smiled. I imagine not. After dinner, Samuel showed Margaret where everything was, made sure she had blankets and water, and then excused himself to check on the livestock with Jack. He found his foreman in the barn, tending to the horses. So, Jack said without preamble, you going to tell me what is really going on with that woman? Her name is Margaret, and exactly what I said happened. I found her near death in the snow, got her to the cabin, and we waited out the storm together. And now you have brought her home. I offered her a job. She needs a place to stay, and I need help around the house. It is a practical arrangement. Jack gave him a long look. Practical, right. You know what I think? I am sure you are going to tell me. I think you are halfway in love with her already, and you have known her less than a week. Samuel opened his mouth to deny it, then closed it again. Was Jack right? Could you fall in love with someone that quickly? I barely know her. Sometimes that does not matter. Sometimes you just know. Jack leaned against a stall door. Ain't saying it is a bad thing, boss. Just saying you should be careful. She is clearly running from something, and people who are running sometimes keep running. I know that. Do you? Because from where I am standing, you have got that look my brother had right before he proposed to his wife. That I found something precious, and I am never letting it go. Look. Samuel rubbed his face tiredly. Even if what you are saying is true, it does not matter. She has not said she will stay, and even if she does, it is only until spring. Then she wants to go to Santa Fe to teach. A lot can happen between now and spring, Jack observed. If she is half as taken with you as you are with her, she might just change her mind about leaving. You got all that from seeing her for 5 minutes. I got that from seeing the way she looked at you when she thought you were not watching. Jack grinned. Trust me on this, that woman is interested. Samuel wanted to believe it, but he could not let himself hope. Not yet. She is vulnerable, and I helped her. That is all it is. If you say so, Jack said, in the same tone he had used that afternoon. But I will be right here to say I told you so when you two get hitched come spring. Samuel threw a piece of straw at him and left the barn, Jack's laughter following him into the cold night. Back in the house, he found Margaret had cleaned up from dinner and was sitting by the fire, reading one of his father's old books. She looked up when he entered, and the smile she gave him made his heart skip. I hope you do not mind, she said, holding up the book. I found your father's collection. He had excellent taste. Read whatever you like. Samuel hung up his coat and moved to warm his hands by the fire. How are you settling in? Very well. The room is lovely, much nicer than any boarding house. She set the book aside. Samuel, about your offer. His heart began to pound. Yes, I want to accept, but I need you to understand something first. She stood facing him directly. I left Boston because I was engaged to be married. The man seemed perfect on the surface, respected, wealthy, charming, but behind closed doors he was cruel. He controlled everything I did, everyone I saw. The engagement had gone on for 2 years, and he kept finding reasons to delay the wedding. I finally realized he would never marry me. He just wanted to own me. Samuel's hands clenched into fists at his sides. Did he hurt you? Not physically. But there are other ways to hurt a person. Margaret's voice was steady, but her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. When I finally found the courage to end the engagement, he destroyed my reputation, spread lies about me so vicious that I lost my teaching position, my friends, everything. I could not stay in Boston, so I took what little money I had saved and came west, hoping to start over. I am sorry, Samuel said, the words feeling inadequate. No one should have to go through that. I tell you this because I need you to know that I cannot make any promises beyond spring. I need time to heal, to figure out who I am without someone trying to control me. If I stay here, it is only as your employee, nothing more. I cannot offer you anything else." Samuel understood what she was saying, what she was not saying. Jack had been right. The attraction was not one-sided. But Margaret was not ready for anything beyond practical arrangements, and he would not push her. "I accept your terms," he said formally. "You work for me until spring, then I will take you to Santa Fe as promised. No obligations beyond that." Relief flooded her face. "Thank you. You have no idea what this means to me." But as Samuel climbed the stairs to his own room that night, he knew that Jack had been right about something else too. He was falling in love with Margaret Harris, perhaps had already fallen, and spring suddenly seemed both impossibly far away and far too close. The next few weeks fell into a comfortable rhythm. Margaret threw herself into running the household with an efficiency that amazed Samuel. The house had never been so clean, so organized. Meals appeared on time and were actually edible, a vast improvement over his own cooking or Jack's attempts at baking. She mended clothes, organized his father's old papers, and even started a small herb garden in the kitchen window. But more than the practical improvements, Margaret brought life to the house. She hummed while she worked, filled the rooms with the scent of baking bread and pine branches she arranged in jars. She left books lying open on tables, tucked wildflowers into cups, and somehow made the large, empty house feel like a home. Samuel found excuses to be inside more often than was strictly necessary. He would come in for lunch when he normally ate with the men. He would remember paperwork that needed doing in the evening. He would think of questions that could only be asked in person rather than waiting until dinner. And Margaret seemed just as guilty of finding reasons to be where he was. She would bring coffee out to the barn when he was working. She would ask his opinion on how to arrange furniture, what to make for dinner, whether he thought it might snow again soon. Their conversations grew longer, more personal, ranging from childhood memories to philosophical debates about books they had both read. December came, bringing with it bitter cold but clear skies. Samuel taught Margaret to ride, spending hours in the corral with her on the gentlest horse he owned. She was a natural, fearless and graceful, and he loved watching her face light up with joy as she finally managed a full circuit of the corral without his help. "I feel like I am flying," she called out, and her laughter rang across the frozen landscape. Samuel stood at the fence, watching her, and knew without a doubt that he loved her. It was not the slow-growing fondness he had expected. It was not the practical affection born of convenience. It was something bigger, fiercer, a certainty that settled into his bones. This woman, with her strength and her vulnerability, her past pain and her present joy, was meant to be his. But he had made a promise. No pressure, no obligations. He would honor that promise even if it killed him. Christmas approached, and Margaret threw herself into preparations with an enthusiasm that both charmed and saddened Samuel. This was clearly her first Christmas without the shadow of her former fiancé, and she seemed determined to make it special. She baked cookies and pies, made evergreen wreaths for every door, and even convinced Samuel to drag a small pine tree into the house to decorate. Jack and Pete joined them on Christmas Eve, and together they shared a meal that felt like family. "This is the best Christmas I have had in years," Jack declared, raising his glass. "To Miss Margaret, who has civilized this bunch of cowboys whether we wanted it or not." "To Margaret," Samuel echoed, meeting her eyes across the table. She blushed but smiled. "To all of you, for making me feel welcome when I had nowhere else to go." After dinner, Jack pulled out a harmonica and Pete revealed a surprisingly good singing voice. They sang carols and songs of the range, the music filling the house with warmth. Margaret sat beside Samuel on the couch, and at some point during the evening her hand found his. He held it gently, his thumb tracing circles on her palm, and neither of them mentioned it when Jack and Pete finally headed back to the bunkhouse. "Thank you," Margaret said softly, still sitting close to him in the firelight. "This has been the best Christmas I can remember." "Thank you for giving us a real Christmas," Samuel replied. "I have not celebrated properly since my father died. This was special." They sat in comfortable silence, hands still intertwined, and Samuel felt the moment stretch out, perfect and fragile. He wanted to tell her he loved her, wanted to ask her to stay beyond spring, wanted to kiss her until neither of them could think straight. But he had made a promise. "I should go to bed," Margaret said finally, though she made no move to stand. "It is late." "One more minute," Samuel said, and she smiled at the phrase that had become a sort of joke between them. Just one more minute. But minutes turned to an hour as they talked by the fire, and when Margaret finally did go upstairs, Samuel sat alone in the dark, wondering how he was going to let her go when spring came. January brought brutal cold and snow that kept them close to the house. Samuel worked on indoor repairs and went through his father's old records while Margaret read, sewed, and continued her campaign to make the house a home. They were together constantly, and the tension between them grew. Small touches became common. A hand on the small of her back as he passed. Her fingers brushing his as she handed him his coffee. Glances that lasted too long, smiles that held too much meaning. Samuel knew he should create distance between them, should honor the boundaries she had set. But he was only human, and Margaret seemed no more able to maintain those boundaries than he was. One evening in late January, a storm rolled in just as Samuel was coming in from the barn. The wind hit him like a physical force, and by the time he made it to the house, he was covered in snow and shaking with cold. Margaret took one look at him and immediately went into action, helping him out of his frozen coat, pushing him toward the fire, wrapping blankets around his shoulders. "You should have come in sooner," she scolded, rubbing his hands between hers to warm them. "You could have frozen out there." "I have been through worse," Samuel managed through chattering teeth, though in truth, he had lost track of time and stayed out longer than was wise. "Like when you found me," Margaret said softly. She was kneeling in front of him, his hand still held in hers, and when he looked down at her, something shifted in the air between them. "Yes," he said, his voice rough. "Like then. You saved my life that day, Samuel." "You have said that before." "I do not think you understand what I mean." Margaret's eyes were intense, her grip on his hands tightening. "You did not just save me from freezing. You saved me from despair, from the belief that I would never be safe, never be happy again. These months with you, they have healed something in me I thought was broken beyond repair." Samuel's heart was pounding so hard he was sure she could hear it. "Margaret, let me finish, please." She took a shaky breath. "When I came here, I told myself it was just until spring. Just a few months to get back on my feet, and then I would go to Santa Fe and start my new life. But somewhere along the way I realized something. I am already living my new life, here with you." Hope surged through Samuel so strongly it was almost painful. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that I do not want to leave in the spring. I am saying that I have fallen in love with you, Samuel Tucker, even though I swore I would never let myself love anyone again." Tears spilled down her cheeks now. "I am saying that if the offer is still open, I want to stay. Not as your employee, as your wife, if you will have me." Samuel pulled her up from the floor and into his lap, his blankets falling away as he wrapped his arms around her. "If I will have you, Margaret, I have been in love with you since the cabin, maybe since the moment I saw you in the snow. I have been counting down to spring with dread, knowing I would have to let you go. You never said anything. I promised I would not pressure you. I promised to give you time to heal. I have healed, Margaret said, cupping his face in her hands. Or at least I am healing. And I know now that I want to heal the rest of the way with you beside me. Samuel kissed her then, finally, after months of wanting to. Her lips were soft and warm, and she kissed him back with a desperation that matched his own. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. "I know that is what you just asked me, but let me do this properly. Margaret Harris, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, yes, yes." They were married in February on a day when the sun shone bright, and the temperature rose just enough to feel almost warm. The ceremony was small, just Jack and Pete as witnesses and a traveling preacher who happened to be passing through. But it was perfect. Margaret wore a dress that had belonged to Samuel's mother, found in a trunk in the attic. With a few alterations, it fit her perfectly, and Samuel's breath caught when he saw her walking down the stairs. "You are the most beautiful thing I have ever seen," he said, and meant it with every fiber of his being. They said their vows in the sitting room, by the fireplace where they had spent so many evenings talking. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Samuel kissed Margaret with all the love he had been holding back, and heard Jack's whoop of celebration in the background. That night, Margaret moved her things into Samuel's room, and they lay together in his bed, talking and laughing and marveling at how much their lives had changed since that day in the snow. "You ever regret it?" Samuel asked, holding her close. "Leaving Boston, coming west, ending up stuck with me?" "Not for a single second," Margaret said firmly. "This is where I was always meant to be. I just had to go through hell to find my way home." "Home," Samuel repeated, liking the sound of it. "That is what you have made this place, you know. Before you it was just a house. Now it is home." Margaret kissed him softly. "We made it a home together, and we are going to fill it with love and laughter, and someday, if we are blessed with children." The thought made Samuel's heart swell. "I would like that. A whole house full of children." "Let us start with one and see how we manage," Margaret said with a laugh. As winter slowly gave way to early spring, they settled into married life with an ease that felt natural and right. Margaret continued to run the household, but now she did it as Samuel's wife, as the lady of the ranch. She began teaching Pete to read in the evenings, and when word got out, 2 more ranch hands from neighboring properties asked if they could join the lessons. "You are going to be a teacher after all," Samuel observed one evening, watching her work with the men. "I suppose I am," Margaret agreed. "Just not in the way I expected." In March, as the snow began to melt and green shoots pushed up through the wet earth, Margaret told Samuel she was pregnant. He swept her up in his arms despite her laughing protests, spinning her around the kitchen with joy. "We are going to have a baby," he kept saying, unable to contain his excitement. "We are going to be parents." "We are," Margaret confirmed, her own face glowing with happiness. "I think it happened on our wedding night, so this baby will come in October when the leaves are turning." October seemed impossibly far away, but Samuel found he did not mind the wait. Every day with Margaret was a gift, and watching her body change as their child grew inside her was a miracle he never tired of. Spring came fully, bringing wildflowers and newborn calves and warm sunshine. They rode together across the ranch, Margaret on the gentle mare Samuel had given her as a wedding present. She loved the land as much as he did, Samuel realized, loved the wide open spaces and the rugged beauty of New Mexico. In May, they made the trip to Santa Fe, not because Margaret needed to go anymore, but because Samuel wanted to show her the town. They spent 3 days there, staying in a hotel, shopping, eating in restaurants, but both of them were eager to return home. "Santa Fe is nice to visit," Margaret said on the journey back. But I would not want to live there. I would miss the ranch too much, miss the quiet and the space. You will not miss city life at all, Samuel asked, surprised. City life never suited me, Margaret admitted. I only thought it did because it was all I knew. But out here, I can breathe. I can be myself without worrying about what society expects or what people will think. I am free in a way I never was before. Summer came hot and dry, but the ranch thrived. Samuel hired another hand to help with the work, knowing that when the baby came in the fall, he would want to spend more time at the house. Margaret's belly grew round and full, and she glowed with health and happiness. In August, they received a letter from Boston. It was from one of Margaret's former friends, writing to tell her that her former fiancé had been arrested for fraud. Apparently, his wealth had been a facade built on debts and stolen money. The scandal had destroyed him in a way his cruelty had never managed to destroy Margaret. I should feel satisfaction, Margaret said, reading the letter, but I just feel sad. Sad for the people he hurt, sad for the life he wasted. That is because you have a good heart, Samuel said, pulling her close, but you do not have to feel anything for him. He lost his power over you the moment you got on that stagecoach. No, Margaret corrected. He lost his power over me the moment you found me in the snow. That was when my real life began. October arrived with cool breezes and turning leaves. On a bright afternoon, with the autumn sun streaming through the bedroom windows, Margaret gave birth to their son. The labor was long and difficult, and Samuel paced the hallway while the doctor and Jack's wife Emma, who had come to help, tended to Margaret. When he finally heard the baby's cry, strong and indignant, Samuel's legs nearly gave out with relief. Emma came to the door with a smile. "You have a son, Samuel, and your wife did beautifully. You can come in now." Samuel entered the room to find Margaret propped up against pillows, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. She looked up at him with tears streaming down her face, and he had never loved her more than in that moment. "Meet your son," she said softly, angling the baby so Samuel could see his face. The infant had a shock of dark hair and deep blue eyes that would probably change color in time. He was perfect, absolutely perfect, and Samuel felt his own eyes fill with tears as he reached out to touch his son's impossibly small hand. "What should we name him?" Margaret asked. Samuel thought of his father, of the man who had built this ranch and taught him everything about being a good person. "Daniel, after my father. Daniel Tucker, if that is all right with you." "Daniel," Margaret repeated, testing the name. "Daniel Tucker, I love it. Hello, Daniel. Welcome home." The first year of Daniel's life passed in a blur of sleepless nights and precious moments. Samuel marveled at how Margaret seemed to know exactly what their son needed at any given moment, how she could soothe his cries with a touch, how she made motherhood look effortless, even when he knew it was anything but. Jack had taken on more of the ranch management, giving Samuel time to be with his family. Samuel was grateful for his friend's loyalty and told him so frequently. "You would do the same for me," Jack always said. "Besides, someone has to keep this place running while you are making moon eyes at your wife and baby." By the following spring, when Daniel was 6 months old, life on the ranch had found a new equilibrium. Samuel's herd had grown, the ranch was prospering, and Margaret had started a small school for the ranch hands and their children. 6 students met in the large dining room 3 times a week, and Margaret taught them reading, writing, and arithmetic with the same passion she had described from her Boston days. "This is better than I ever imagined," she told Samuel one night as they sat on the porch, watching the sun set while Daniel slept in his cradle beside them. "Teaching children who really want to learn, who understand that education is a gift. I am making a difference in their lives." You make a difference in all our lives, Samuel said, taking her hand. I still cannot believe that storm brought you to me, that I was in exactly the right place at exactly the right time. Fate, Margaret said with a smile, or maybe just luck. Either way, I am grateful. When I left Boston, I thought I was running away. I did not realize I was running toward something, toward you, toward this life, toward home. They sat in comfortable silence as the sky turned from gold to pink to purple. Daniel stirred in his sleep but did not wake. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called and another answered. The spring breeze carried the scent of sage and wildflowers. You ever think about that first night in the cabin? Samuel asked. How scared you must have been. I was terrified, Margaret admitted. But even then, I felt safe with you. You had this way of being calm and capable that made me believe everything would be all right. I did not feel calm. I kept thinking about all the things that could go wrong. But you did not let me see that. You were my rock when I needed one. Samuel lifted her hand to his lips. And you became my heart when I did not even know I was missing one. 2 years passed with the easy rhythm of ranch life. Daniel grew into a curious, active toddler who followed his father everywhere, his chubby legs working hard to keep up with Samuel's long strides. Margaret was pregnant again, and this time she carried the child with the confidence of experience rather than the nervousness of a first-time mother. In the spring of 1888, 4 years after Samuel had found Margaret in the snow, their daughter was born. They named her Sarah, after Samuel's mother, and she had Margaret's dark eyes and delicate features. Our family is complete, Margaret said, holding Sarah while Daniel peered at his new sister with fascination. Is it? Samuel asked with a grin. I seem to recall you saying we should fill this house with children. 2 is a good start, Margaret said firmly. Ask me again in a few years. But they did not wait a few years. In rapid succession came another son, Thomas, and then a daughter, Emma, named for Jack's wife who had become Margaret's closest friend. The house that had once echoed with emptiness now rang with the sounds of children, with laughter and tears and the organized chaos of family life. Samuel expanded the ranch, buying adjacent property as it became available. The ranch hands who worked for him were loyal and hardworking, drawn not just by fair wages, but by the sense of family that Samuel and Margaret had created. Several of them married and brought their wives to live on the ranch, and a small community developed. Margaret's school grew as well. She now taught 15 students, children of ranch hands and neighboring homesteaders. She had managed to get textbooks sent from back east and had even started a small library. Some of her students had gone on to further education, something that filled her with immense pride. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Samuel took Margaret on another trip to Santa Fe. Emma and Jack looked after the children, who ranged in age from 9-year-old Daniel to 2-year-old Emma. I cannot believe it has been 10 years, Margaret said as they rode side by side, just the two of them for the first time in what felt like forever. It seems like yesterday that I was a frozen stranger you rescued from the snow. Best rescue I ever made, Samuel said. Though I think you might have rescued me just as much as I rescued you. How do you figure that? I was lonely, Margaret. I did not realize it at the time, but I was. I had convinced myself that the ranch was enough, that I did not need anything or anyone else. But you showed me what I was missing. You gave me a family, a purpose beyond just survival. You gave me love. Margaret's eyes shimmered with tears. You gave me those things too, and safety, and trust. I did not think I would ever be able to trust a man again, but you proved me wrong in the best possible way. In Santa Fe, Samuel had a surprise for her. He took her to a jeweler and had a ring made, a gold band with a small sapphire set in it. "I never gave you a proper engagement ring," he said, slipping it onto her finger. This seemed like the right time to remedy that. Margaret looked at the ring, then at Samuel, and then she was crying and laughing at the same time. "It is perfect. You are perfect. This life is perfect." That night, in their hotel room, they made love with the unhurried passion of two people who knew each other completely, who had weathered storms both literal and figurative and come through stronger. Afterward, lying in Samuel's arms, Margaret said, "Thank you." "For what?" "For keeping your promise. For never pushing me, for giving me time to heal, for loving me even when I did not think I deserved to be loved. You have always deserved love, Margaret, always." They returned home to chaos, as Daniel had apparently tried to train one of the barn cats to pull a toy wagon, and the results had been disastrous. But it was the good kind of chaos, the kind that came from a house full of life and love. The years continued to pass. Daniel grew tall and serious, inheriting his father's love of the land. Sarah was quiet and thoughtful, always with her nose in a book. Thomas was wild and fearless, keeping Margaret's hair gray with his antics. And Emma, the baby, was sweet and gentle, a peacemaker among her siblings. Jack and his wife had children of their own, as did Pete, who had married a woman from town. The ranch prospered year after year, growing into one of the most successful in the territory. When New Mexico achieved statehood in 1912, Samuel and Margaret attended the celebrations in Santa Fe with their adult children, marveling at how much the world had changed since that day in 1884. "We have lived through so much," Margaret said, watching the festivities. "The country has changed so much. But some things stay the same," Samuel said, his arm around her waist. "Like how much I love you." "Sentimental old man," Margaret teased, but she leaned into him, still fitting perfectly against his side after all these years. Daniel took over most of the ranch operations as Samuel and Margaret grew older, though Samuel still rode out most days, unable to fully give up the work he loved. Margaret continued teaching until her late 60s, finally retiring when her eyesight began to fail. On a spring day in 1920, Samuel found Margaret standing at the window of their bedroom, looking out at the land they had built their life on. She was 78 now, her dark hair completely silver, her face lined with the evidence of a life well lived. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, coming to stand beside her. "About that storm," she said. "The one that brought me to you. I was thinking about how scared I was, how certain I was going to die in that snow, and then you appeared like an answer to a prayer I did not even know I had said." "I was the lucky one," Samuel said. "Finding you was the best thing that ever happened to me. We have had a good life, have not we? The best life." Samuel took her hand, the one that wore both his mother's wedding ring and the sapphire he had given her on their 10th anniversary. "No regrets?" "Not a single one." Margaret turned to face him fully. "I love you, Samuel Tucker. I have loved you since that cabin when I kept saying one more night and you never made me feel like I was a burden. Thank you for giving me not just one more night, but thousands of them. And I will take thousands more if fate grants them to us," Samuel said, pulling her close. They stood together in the window, looking out at the ranch that had been built with love and hard work, at the land that had tested them and shaped them and ultimately given them everything. In the distance, they could see their grandchildren playing in the yard, hear their laughter carried on the spring breeze. Samuel Tucker and Margaret Harris had started with one frozen night and a desperate plea for shelter. They had built from that foundation a love that had lasted through decades, through challenges and triumphs, through the ordinary moments that made up a life. The storm had brought them together, but it was their choice to stay together, to build something beautiful from that chance meeting that had given them their happily ever after. And as they stood together in the home they had made, surrounded by the evidence of their love in the form of children and grandchildren and a prosperous ranch. They knew that every frozen moment, every whispered "one more night," had been worth it. For they had not just survived that winter storm in 1884. They had used it as the foundation for something far greater, a love that warmed them through every season, a partnership that made them both stronger, and a family that would carry their legacy forward for generations to come. The sun set over the New Mexico landscape, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and gold, and Samuel and Margaret Tucker watched it together, hands intertwined, hearts forever joined, grateful for the storm that had changed everything and the love that had endured through all the years that followed. Their story, which had begun with frost and fear and a cowboy's compassion, had become a testament to the transformative power of love, the importance of second chances, and the truth that sometimes the most unexpected moments lead to the most extraordinary lives. And every year on the anniversary of that blizzard, they would sit together by the fire and tell their children and grandchildren the story of how they met, of the cabin and the storm and the phrase that became their promise to each other: just one more night. Because sometimes one more night leads to forever, and sometimes forever is exactly what two hearts need to truly find their way home.